In the thick of what authorities call the 100 deadliest days on the road right now, they're urging drivers to be more cautious out there, especially after several crashes already this summer, resulting in deaths or serious injuries. Valley News Team's Gabriel Osler explains how you can help keep the roads safe.
We had a head-on crash that happened down by Lisbon on Highway 27 that resulted in 3 fatalities. It was a head-on crash. We just had a head-on crash last week down in the city of Horace, where there's 2 vehicles involved. 4 teenagers were injured in that crash.
Those are just some of the incidents that come to the mind of Captain Brian Niewind of the North Dakota Highway Patrol. He's seeing far too many accidents as of late, deep into the 100 deadliest days of summer.
We call it the 100 deadliest days of the year because it truly is. We have way too many crashes that happen during that time frame.
Niewind cited several factors that cause this uptick in lethality, but stressed that, no matter the cause, defensive driving remains of paramount importance.
We can be the best driver in the world and through no fault of our own get involved in a crash that maybe is even preventable.
As does wearing your seatbelt.
We saw that just down this last week down in Horace with a head-on crash. 3 young girls were injured in that crash, but if they had not been wearing their seatbelts, that would have probably been a different type of tragedy. So
it does seem like there have been an outsized number of accidents recently, with lethal rear endings just this month in Mercer and Grand Forks counties, and a life-threatening one near Jamestown. Niewind says he doesn't have any stats that show the problem is particularly bad this year as opposed to others. In his mind, any amount of crashes is too many.
Our summer season has more serious crashes that occur. There's less crashes that occur during the summer months, but they're more serious.
In Fargo, Gabriel Osler, Valley News Live.
So the deadliest season on the roads is from roughly Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day.